Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my show Computer Wednesday. In today's episode we're going to take a look at a messy topic, that is color space. So let's dive right into it. Now before we understand how computers handle this, we have to understand what the heck color and our eye does to show us colors. Now the whole concept comes from photons and visible electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic spectrum is very wide. Be mindful of that. It goes up from gamma rays to FM radio. Like there is a very wide range. In that wide range, there is a narrow piece that starts from roughly 380 nanometers to 750 nanometer. That range of that spectrum is what we call visible electromagnetic spectrum. So that visible range is like what we can see. It's all similar to how your hearing can only hear from a certain frequency to certain high frequency. It can't hear ultrasound nor it can hear infrasound. So it's like that. So that range is from 380 nanometer to 750 nanometer. Now be mindful because of the interaction in this, how this wavelength interacts with every atom. There is a near infinite combination of colors. So that's the source of it. Okay, then how do we perceive it? We perceive it through our eyes. Specifically, we have retinas that handle this situation. Retina converts the spectrum basically to a signal. Now be mindful, there is no such thing as color in this. That's why you whenever a radar works, it's a black and white. Like if an alien that is not tuned to the spectrum, let's say they are tuned to radio wave, or let's say more tuned to infrared or ultraviolet, they will simply not see this. This is our brain's way to catalog the world that it sees. The color violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, that's color is not there as in like a physical property. It's your brain giving it a basically band. Okay, I'm gonna call it red, I'm gonna call it red. That's why different cultures have different name, and that's why we have so much issue with perception. That's why, like, you know, is this dress gold or is this the dress blue? So these sort of things happen because it's perception based. So red, what is red to you may be orangish for someone else, and this is very prominent with skin tone. So let's say you live in British Isle and you see someone like, you know, whitish, you will be like, okay, that's normal for me. Let's say I live in South India, and if I see someone whitish, I'll be like, dude, are you okay? Like, you know, this is kind of odd for us. And so, like, you know, our skin tones have very lot of range, and that range is coming from the fact because that spectrum has no hard lines. That's why when you see rainbow, you never see okay, this is like, you know, from violet to blue, there is a band. There is no band, there is a smooth gradient. So be mindful, it is very complex. Our brain is giving it color, our eyes are interacting it to give us the perception, and the physical reality of it is that there is no color. It's just that our brain has given it, you know, slots. It's like, okay, if I receive something from 380 nanometers to 450 nanometer, I'm gonna call it violet. So be mindful, it's very complex, and on top of that, because it's perception based, it's very hard to quantify. Because somebody might say this green that I'm wearing is grass green, somebody will say it's tan green, there are 10,000 other situations, like, you know, somebody will say this is a, you know, patina green. There are many situations. So problem arises from the fact that everything is freaking different. Every display is different. This display is different from my computer display. It is different from the display that you are watching this on. Everything is different. Every camera, every printer. To give you a context how far things can have gone apart is like many of you are familiar with this Epson ink tank printers, where you have CMYK, basically cyan, magenta, yellow, and K representing key, generally representing black. So that's normal for us, but this is a professional printer from Canon which has PM, PC, Y, M, R, PBK, C, CO, MBK, GY. Like, as you can see, like, there are many cartridges, many colors that are used. So everything is different. Be mindful of this. Creates a lot of chaos. How do we handle things? Like, how do you make sure when you say someone, okay, this person is white, what shade of white? How do you make sure that matters? That is like accurate. So we come to color gamut. Now the color gamut is basically a way to handle this sort of problem. It's like white, what white? Like, you know, white of the sun or white of the egg white, or there are many things. So to give you a simple idea, let's say you say red. Computer does not know what red it's supposed to show. It's just simply got the data. Okay, there is red, but what red? Is it cherry red? Is it blood red? Is it rose red? So all of these red, they are still red. So how do you define it? So some people sat down and created mathematical algorithms that we use, which we generally refer to as color gamut. That way we can map out these colors, because RGB may sound very simple. Oh, there is R, there is G, there is B, but in real life there is RGB plus luminance, basically how bright those things are. That's why your LCD generally have a backlit. And even if you have AMOLED, that brightness, it cannot be like, you cannot make a red go like very bright, because it will become white. So things of that nature play a very crucial role. So to make sure all this does not confuse every programmer, every videographer, we come up with what we call gamuts. Now the gamut is a way to trying to tame the chaos. So but it also ended up with the same amount of chaos. Now this graph, whenever you see something like this is a mathematical representation of whatever I can see. This is not something that I can tangibly show you. This is not something like I can show you under a microscope or a particle accelerator. This is just a mathematical graph, because not only our eyes are a bit more sensitive than originally thought, the fact that brain is interpreting it's kind of confusing, and the fact that you can't actually see the retina because it's always drenched in blood. So we have no actual way of perceiving how the heck a retina is working. So we have RGB, which is very common for you and I, for TV, monitors, everything electronic. Then we have CMYK, which is for printers. So some people came along, and in early years, and I'm talking very early, so like 1980s kind of early, sRGB was created. This is a spectrum, this is a mathematical data point that if your camera is shooting a photo, it will try to map the colors using that data point. That's what I told you, like this is a mathematical model. So red, it's gonna say like, okay, in this axis go that far. That way I'm gonna you're gonna make sure that red is there. So sRGB is an old standard, obviously it's very old. So then Adobe comes along, and Adobe, HP, and many other creators come along, like electronic manufacturers they come up with a bigger gamut. That gamut is known as Adobe RGB. Now there is another mathematical gamut which is called Pro RGB, but it is more mathematical because there is no display technology that can display that kind of color. Now there is kind of misconception that if you have higher bit depth, you generally end up with Adobe RGB. That is not true. It's true in nowadays, simply because if somebody is giving you a 10-bit panel, they generally try to give you Adobe RGB. But you can end up in a scenario where you bought an old monitor, old as in from like manufacturer's point of view, like this is old technology and they are reselling it. It's but it could still have sRGB but have 10-bit. Now what does that bit means? Bit depth only represents how many steps you have. So let's assume from white to any corners, like that's your line. Now if that line has 255 slots, like how many slots you can occupy, that's generally 8-bit. Now from, let's say, absolute white to absolute green, if there is 222 slots, that's 8-bit. Now if there is 1000 plus slot, that's 10-bit. So do not mistake that fact, like you could have 10-bit panel, but it still may not be Adobe RGB. Will it be look better? Yeah, undeniably so, because there is much more gradient. It can show color without banding. And I can't really show this sort of thing to you using camera or to using basically Photoshops or things of that nature. It will simply not translate. You have to perceive it in real life. Otherwise there is no other way to show it. So it's a very messy. All you have to understand is bit depth defines how many steps you have from brightest bright to blackest black. Now you're like, okay, why white? We are talking about black and white. RGB is simply black and white information. It's just that you say RGB data to the channel itself. So if you ever found a technology where you can see just, let's say, R channel of it, it's still black and white. If you see the blue channel of something, it's still black and white. All these things are black and white. Only difference is they are telling basically green LEDs to like glow or not, red LEDs to glow or not, or blue LEDs to glow or not. You can simply see it in your Photoshop. There is a channel mode where you can see RGB. Each channel itself is black and white. That's why I'm saying 0 to 22 simply represent from white to black. So if you have 255 steps, that's 8-bit. If you have more steps than that, you have higher bit depth. How high can you go? Sky is the limit. You can go upwards of 24. But good luck with that. That file size would be enormous. So how do we handle this? That's a messy situation, and my explanation might have made it even worse. So how do we handle this? Thankfully, there is one expensive solution, but it does solve all the problem. It's basically calibration is our savior here. Now calibrate everything. So what does that mean? Now think of this way, every camera sensor is different. Even though a camera manufacturer, let's say Canon, tries to make sure their Canon sensor is like from Canon 800D to Canon 80D same, it still will have minor variation. It's simple matter of physics, because I told you wavelengths interact differently. So you might have like, that is bit off, that is unperceivable for human eye, but that is still off. That off may not be an issue, but now imagine you put a lens that added that bit more cast. Like if you have seen my episode on Camera Tuesday about lenses, lenses give you the color aspect. The lenses are responsible for color rendition. So what if lens itself has a, let's say, blue tint or a kind of purplish tint? So it does happen. It's very common to see in cheap lenses. Expensive lenses generally try to make sure they are as close to neutral as possible, but nothing can be absolutely neutral. So how do you handle it? These sort of kit is your savior. They are very expensive, I understand it. Be mindful, because they are not mass production thing. They are not cheap. Like inherently nothing is expensive in that, but companies that manufacture these sort of things, they only sell few pieces. So that's why it's so expensive. So if you are a, let's say, model shoot, who are like, your models are paid models, they are very expensive, they want to go for let's say for Playboy or things of that nature, you will always carry this. So you will simply ask your model to carry it like this next to your face. The reason why people want it next to their face is that is a very easy way to see your skin tone changed or not, because sometimes it may change for worse and you're like, okay, I don't want that. So that's why generally people keep it next to their face and you capture it. That way you create a profile that this software will allow you to, like, okay, this profile is for how my camera interacts with this lens and how it interacts with my monitor. And then you can use this sort of color palette to use on scanner, to use on printed output. So this way you can make sure that whatever you are seeing on your screen matches with your printout. That's how whenever you see people, like, whenever you go to a color shop, basically that's the most common place where you see calibrated things. They give you a booklet and each booklet has a color code and number there. How the heck companies can make sure that color code matches what really is there? This is done through calibration. Calibration is your savior. It does not matter if you have sRGB or Adobe RGB or somehow magically Pro RGB. If it is calibrated, you good. If it's not calibrated, you dead. So calibrate it. Now you might be like, okay, but these things cost too much money. You may be lucky because some places, especially in big towns, there are people who rent this sort of things, so you can easily take it out for rent. And if you have, let's say, a studio where multiple people are working there, or you have multiple monitor and you want to work in all of them, let's say I want to work sometimes on this monitor, sometimes on my dual monitor, sometimes maybe in future a laptop, buying those sort of device will make sure that if I let's say color match something in my photography, it matches everything. Because if let's say I change the red on a monitor that is a bit more bluish, that red is different in this monitor. So to make sure you don't pull your hair out, to make sure you don't die from your frustration that, okay, my printer is printing different compared to what is on the screen, that can be eliminated if you calibrate properly. Good tools like this save you a lot of money. And yes, print that is coming out of your printer should match what is on your screen. There is no such thing as backlit and frontlit. If it done correctly, if done the luminance value is calibrated properly, it will match. That's the whole point. And in printer, especially pro printers, go so far ahead that they will actually tell you, if you have this paper, please use this calibrated profile for that paper. So if you buy, let's say, Kodak paper, there will be in Canon printer itself, they will say drop down Kodak paper I'm using. In that Kodak paper, it will say you glossy Kodak paper or let's say matte paper, things of that nature. So the more you calibrate, the more comfortable your life will be. More you'll be like, oh, I'm making green, it's gonna look green. Now you might be asking, okay, let's say I calibrated everything on my end, what about the audience that are observing it? Well, this is where artistic license comes in. People generally, once they match everything, they exaggerate everything. That is generally done to appease audience. That may be good, that may be bad, it's up to you. It's like watching a movie. Then it becomes a creative license. But if you can't match it before it goes to your computer, like if it's not calibrated, your artistic license may mess up everything. So for this reason, there is a simple solution. Just get this sort of system. So this was my presentation on color gamuts. I hope you understand that it's not a big deal. All you have to do is figure out how do you gonna buy the equipment or calibrate it yourself, and then you will be golden. I hope you liked it or learned from it. In that case, please leave a like. If you didn't, don't worry about it. You can dislike it. I would urge you to leave a comment what you wanna see in the next episode of Computer Wednesday. And I would say please subscribe, share it amongst your friends. hashtag S2T, and I would ask you to press the bell icon if you are free. And as always, thanks for watching.